Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us once again here at the Blue Lotus Meditation and Mindfulness Center. We're delighted to have you with us listening to our guided meditation and wonderful Dharma talks that help spread the light, the warmth, the understanding of the Buddha's teachings, the Dharma. So thank you for sitting with us this evening. We're delighted to have you with us. So today is October 13th. It is now 6 p.m. here in the Central Time Zone in the United States. We're located in central Minnesota, which is the northern part of the United States, if you're unfamiliar with that. And our center is located in Brainerd, which is pretty much the center, pretty close to the center of Minnesota. And so we are getting ready right in the midst of autumn or fall. So here at our center, we're experiencing a lot of those temperature changes for one, right? Getting a little bit cooler outside, brisk mornings, and the leaves are changing colors, right? The beautiful reds and oranges and yellows. So all those pretty leaves are changing colors at this time. And so if you've been to our center, you've probably seen, some of those changes as well. But even if you haven't, right, there's plenty of videos and pictures of beautiful autumn afternoons and daytimes. And so you're always welcome to come sit with us whenever you like. Plenty of space at our sites to come sit with us and just even be by yourself at times. So just a couple of brief announcements. Just a reminder that we do have our YouTube channel memberships. That helps support us, making these live Dharma talks possible each and every week, or each and every other week, I should say, bi-weekly. And it helps, just keep the day-to-day actions and events that we do in the community. So our weekly sanghas, where we meet with, veterans and teenagers and people maybe who are struggling with, addiction or whatnot. We help spread and share the light of the Dharma with them. So YouTube channel memberships are just one way to help support us in those efforts. And, the path of liberation that you all personally are experiencing. And that's what that helps. It helps spread that joy and that mindfulness of the Dharma to others. And then we do have a couple of new books out, so you may find them interesting. Feel free to take a look. They're you can find our website, in the description below. But we have 30-day Dharma-centered gratitude journal right now. We also have our 30-day Dhammapada study guide, and so you may find those interesting. If you're not familiar with the Dhammapada, those are a collection of Buddhist teachings. They're not the sutras that you've probably read and heard of, like the Heart Sutra and the Diamond Sutra and the Lotus Sutra. I don't know, a whole 84,000 other types of sutras out there. So if you want to take a look, you're more than welcome to. But let's begin our services with our service tonight with our three jewels. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Sathu, Sathu, Sathu. So very nice. So we do offer our acknowledgement and our respect to the Buddha, to the Dharma, and to you, our Sangha. So tonight's topic, arrows of compassion, stronger than mountains, right? Arrows, compassion, mountains, some pretty big descriptive words, right? And there's a little bit of poetry in our titles to help elicit imagination, right? To help get the story across in an artful way, right? In a skillful and artful way, that make it, easily relatable. So arrows of compassion, stronger than mountains, right? A lot of things going on in that title. But let's start with our guided meditation, which will conveniently be called arrows of compassion. So our guided meditation always relates to our Dharma talk. So it gives us a foundation, sets the tone, sets the spirit and the body in a relaxed state. So we are much more open to receiving, what we'll be talking about this evening. So arrows of compassion. So go ahead and let's begin by taking a moment to settle your body into a comfortable position. And you may keep your eyes open or slightly open or close them entirely if you like. It's a personal preference. Breathe in. Pause. And breathe out. And then while you sit there, you are warmly invited to just allow a half smile to rest on your face. And lift your spine and allow your shoulders to soften. And soften your belly as you continue settling in. Breathe in. Pause. And breathe out. And let's meditate on our arrows of compassion. And imagine that within your heart, there is a quiver of luminous arrows, not weapons of harm, but arrows of compassion. And each arrow glows with a soft golden light, forged from kindness, wisdom, and your own capacity to care. Those arrows do not wound. They pierce through ignorance, anger, and fear. And they are light that travels far, reaching those who suffer, those who are lost, and even those who may have caused harm. And hold one of those arrows in your mind. Feel its warmth, the energy of loving intention. And notice that compassion is not weakness. It is a strength guided by clarity. And it moves straight from the heart, swift, steady, and unnerving in its direction. Now, bring to mind someone who is suffering, someone you know personally, or someone in the wide world. And visualize gently drawing back the bowstring of your heart. And with a steady breath, release an arrow of compassion towards them. And as this arrow flies, it leaves a trail of light, of beautiful, radiant light, a message of care, of peace, of deep understanding. It reaches them softly, dissolving some small part of their pain. And now send another to those you do not know, but who are struggling. Again, the lonely, the frightened, the forgotten. And now one more to someone with whom you've had conflict with. And let this arrow carry forgiveness, or even the simple wish to forgive. And feel how compassion frees you as much as it helps the other. Now, imagine all these arrows returning to you, but lighter, softer, transformed into threads of light. And they weave around you like a gentle robe of golden warmth. You sit or rest now in the heart of compassion itself, calm, radiant, and deeply connected with all beings. Go ahead and take a few deep breaths here and let the mind rest in quiet gratitude for the strength of your heart, for the wisdom of compassion, and for the endless possibility of love in action. And then when you're ready, bring your awareness back to your surroundings, and then feel your body, your breath, and the space around you. And then gently open your eyes, carrying with you the reminder that compassion, when released, always finds its way back, stronger, brighter, and purer than before. We often underestimate the power of compassion because in many societies, compassion is viewed as something soft, right? Or being very sentimental or unmasculine, right? Oftentimes, compassion is viewed as being feminine, but it's not, right? It's being viewed as a weakness instead of a strength in that sense. But if we look at what compassion is, it takes a lot of insight. It takes a lot of realization and openness and understanding. Because oftentimes, think about when you've been angry. We'll use you as an example, or even me at one point. When you were angry, you didn't want to hear anything else. You were right. Right? You were so strong in your opinion or your conclusion, you did not want to hear anything else. And that was a sign of strength. Right? And if you flip-flopped or changed your mind, that was a sign of weakness. Maybe you changed your mind because of compassion, right? You saw how somebody else feels. And that's what tonight's Dharma talk is, hours of compassion, stronger than mountains. And so we're going to reflect on how compassion, that when it's fully awakened, it really becomes a force stronger than those mountains and able to pierce through even the hardest hearts and the darkest ignorance. But we have to have patience with that, right? So with compassion also comes patience. So what does it mean? The meaning of this particular title, right? So the hours of compassion, they symbolize that penetrating transformative power of the awakened heart, right? And those mountains, right? They just represent obstacles. Things like hatred, pride, delusion, and the rigid ego, right? That clings to ourselves. So think about that, right? I kind of just mentioned that ego, right? That sign of strength, right? That we've always been told is us, right? That ego, that selfless, or that selfishness. But just as that arrow flies swift and true, right? Compassion moves directly towards the heart of suffering without hesitation and without judgment. So compassion is very open, right? It wants to hear, it wants to help, it wants to nurture and be supportive. It wants to understand. So the nature of compassion, right? So compassion in Buddhism, right? It's not pity or sentimentality, right? It is simply the wisdom that sees suffering clearly and acts to alleviate it. Remember, right? All beings, all sentient beings suffer. So compassion, right, gives us that wisdom, right? Or it is the wisdom that, allows us to see suffering clearly, right? And that it arises when the mind is purified of self-centered grasping, right? Holding on to things, ego, right? If we're always holding on to the ego, we're never going to understand someone else, and we're not going to be able to open our heart. And the Buddha taught that compassion and wisdom, maybe you know this, right? That compassion and wisdom are like two wings on a bird, right? They are both needed to soar beyond suffering. So we need compassion and wisdom. They go together. Without those two wings, right? Compassion and wisdom, that bird isn't going to fly, right? We're not going to be able to help, right? So we have to have compassion and wisdom as well. And then to be compassionate, again, it's not to be weak. It's to be strong enough to face the pain of the world and respond with love rather than aversion. So think about that. How easy is it to just turn a blind eye, right? To completely alienate or sequester ourselves from the goings on of others' suffering. It's easy to do. Turn off your device, your tablet, your phone, your TV. Turn off your computer, right? Stay away from people. Stay away from animals, right? Because even animals suffer, right? But compassion itself as an active force, right? Remembering that compassion is not passive. It's not just sitting back, right? It's an active action. Remember, before any of our physical actions, it all begins in one place, in our mind. right? So it takes a mindset for an action to happen. And so compassion is not passive. It moves, it acts, it transforms. And in the Mahayana tradition, right, the Bodhisattva, I will talk about one of the more famous bodhisattvas, right, embodies this dynamic compassion, right, returning to the world again and again to liberate beings. And in fact, you're probably familiar with the different sects of Buddhism, right? Theravada, Mahayana, and Tibetan. And there's some other smaller ones, but they usually fall under the Tibetan tradition. And so with Mahayana Buddhists, they hold off on their own enlightenment to help living beings with their suffering here on earth, right? So with their compassion, so unlimited and boundless compassion. And so for each act of kindness, patience, and understanding becomes that arrow that pierces the illusion of separateness. So very often, people become disillusioned because they separate themselves from someone else. Think about some of the words that we use to separate ourselves from others. Maybe there's a political designation. Maybe there's a country or an ethnicity designation that we use to separate someone else. Maybe someone's acts are so heinous and violent that you may call them a monster. And monster is it's separating them from us, even though their acts are very, very, again, could be very violent or heinous and very harmful of others. But that's an illusion of separateness, right? When we refer to someone a person other than being a human being. And so a single, genuine act of compassion can change the course of a life. It can dissolve years of resentment, right? Or soften a hardened heart. And we have a really wonderful story coming up about that, right? About how compassion can soften and change someone's path that they're on, right? But what are those obstacles that we face, right? Mountains, right? We're just calling them mountains, in our Dharma talk, but they're just obstacles. And those mountains could be anger, fear, greed, and ignorance, right? These all stand in the way of us being compassionate to one another. Think about that. Anger, right? Maybe somebody doesn't meet your expectations, which is another Dharma talk, right? Expectations, but maybe they didn't meet your expectation in some sort of way, right? You get angry. Fear that somebody else is going to have something that you don't, right? Or greed. I have to protect mine, so nobody else can have it. I'll hoard this particular resource or whatever it is, right? It could even be a feeling, right? And then ignorance, right? Just the willful unknowing, right, of a particular action. Those all stand in the way of us being compassionate towards someone else and also towards ourselves. And then there's those inner mountains of pure solid, right? Or those inner mountains that we consider like anger, fear, and greed, right? We give them so much value, so much structure and importance that they appear solid and that they may even seem impermanent, right? But how do we get those, right? How do those solid mountains kind of arise? Built from thought and memory and attachment. One of the stories, and it goes along with this, our thoughts, those mountains or limiting mindsets. You may have heard this before, but a limiting mindset is just a mindset that limits us from some type of activity. For me, when I was a child, baseball. I was not a strong baseball player, right? I would always swing and a miss. So that kind of stuck with me as I was going through grade school, right? Third, fourth, fifth grade, and so forth. That I would always dread, right? Going up to bat. So that was my own mountain, right? I did not have that compassion for myself, understanding that it just takes practice. Right? I'm in sixth grade. Oh no, like third or fourth, maybe fifth grade, something like that. I did not have the understanding of compassion for myself to tear down, to erode that inner mountain, right? From a thought, right? And then it became an attachment, right? I was attached to that thought that I was always a swing and a miss at that bat when it was my turn to be at bat. But that arrow of compassion, right, pierces them, right? Those thoughts and memories and attachments. And when we meet suffering with awareness, right, not avoidance, right? So when anger arises within you or someone else, send compassion. When fear arises within you or someone else, send compassion. When ignorance clouds the mind with you or someone else, send compassion, right? So the idea is that we always send compassion over and over again until that mountain dissolves or erodes away. So one of the stories, one of those wonderful, it's truly one of my favorite stories about the Buddha is the Buddha and Anulama, right? That serial killer, that mass murderer who had the garland of fingers around his neck, right? And in the murder, he was transformed by the Buddha's fearless compassion, right? That arrow that pierced his heart. And the story is that, he was, Anulama was fearless, or he was feared, in the forest. And then Buddha was walking in that forest one day and he came up running to the Buddha, screaming and, all in a threatening manner. And Buddha just looked at him, smiled, and continued along his way. And Anulama came back up to him and was like, "Aren't you afraid of me? I've got all this, reputation. I'm wearing a garland of fingers around my neck and so forth." Buddha simply replies, "I gave up fear a long time ago. And you're just a man, just like I am." And so Buddha approached him and showed him the power of being compassionate, right? And that pierced that man's heart, and it transformed him from being, somebody fearful and scary in that sense, right, to someone very well respected. He became one of Buddha's most precious disciples, followers. And then Ganyen, right? The Bodhisattva of compassion. She hears the cries of all beings and responds without hesitation, to the world, to the people of the world, right? And she sends out countless arrows of mercy flying in all directions, right? But for us, right, we can have compassion in action through forgiveness, social services, or even caring for the environment, right? The living Dharma, right, in our age. So just having care for where we are, right, for where we live, right, through forgiveness, and even volunteering, right, through some type of social service, Maybe you work or donate your time with a homeless shelter or with children, or maybe help, maybe you read stories, right, to children or whatever, right? There are many ways to throw those arrows of compassion, those warm, loving arrows towards the world. But how can we practice, right, those arrows of compassion throughout the world, right? So mindful awareness, right? Noticing that suffering in yourself and others without judgment. Sometimes we can see the suffering in others, right? We can see it on their faces, and we want to help. Sometimes it's harder for us to acknowledge that suffering within us, within ourselves, because we expect ourselves to be better, to behave differently, to toughen up, right? But we have to have that mindful awareness without judgment. And so when we say that we need to toughen up, that's judgmental, right? It's judgmental. So just being aware of it, right? And then loving kindness, right? Radiating goodwill, right? Just like in that guided meditation that we did earlier, right? Radiating goodwill, like those arrows of light that we just talked about, throughout the world, to ourselves, to others, to people we dislike, and then those arrows return to us, right? Keeping us warm, knowing that we did an act of compassion towards others, right? Speech and action, speaking in ways and acting in ways that heal and not harm. That's so important. Too often we are quick in the tongue to give a rebuttal, right? To maybe perhaps put someone down, right? Or even acting in ways perhaps that don't unite us, right? They separate us, causing more division. And then patience, right? Bearing difficulties with gentle strength through your awakened heart. Remember, a lot of times compassion takes a new way of thinking, a new way to respond. Because a lot of time, again, like we mentioned earlier in our talk this evening, compassion is often viewed upon as a weakness. So it takes patience for us to shift our mindsets from one of protectiveness, right, to one of openness, right? Having that vulnerability for someone else and to ourselves. So it takes time, all right? These aren't always overnight practices, right? And then dedication, right? Directing all of our merit towards the benefit of all beings. So it's not like a dedication, like I'm dedicating a plaque, right? Dedication, right? Sending our merit outwards, right? For the benefit of all beings. So we can even start our day when we wake up with that type of a dedication, that may all of our actions be for the benefit of others, right? Notice I didn't say for ourselves. We have that dedication, right? Outwards, because it will come back automatically, right? And remembering that each moment of mindfulness is an arrow itself, right? Each an act of love, a victory over mountains of ignorance, right? So remembering that those arrows of compassion, right? Those are arrows of love, right? Of warmth, right? Of support, of unity, of compassion, recognizing someone else's humanity, not separating them from us. And so just kind of reiterating, right, the central truth, the central message, right? Those mountains of delusion that we see, they may seem unshakable, like they may seem unsurmountable, like impossible objects, right? But compassion, pure, selfless, and wisdom, and or wise, it's stronger than any force in the world. right? It truly is. Compassion is much more stronger than hatred, anger, and greed. And then for tonight, for our ending, let's think about this, together a little bit in this type of little um, mantra, right? And may all beings be free from suffering, right? And may the arrows of compassion fly free from our hearts until the mountains of ignorance crumble into the dust of awakening, right? We can do this, right? We can. You can do it too. Because the same trials and tribulations, the uncertainties that you experience, others experience too. And think of those moments where you wanted compassion and you needed compassion. Think about when you weren't met with compassion. And then think of another time when you were met with compassion. So that's how we can help spread and share the Dharma. And so I do want to add that if you do find these Dharma talks and the messages that we love to share with you, right, from the Buddhist teachings, we love to share them, recommend us to someone else. We would love to have them sit with us as well, right? If they're live or even a previous recording, we would love to. And feel free to message us as well if you have any questions or just need some guidance or assistance. Feel free to message us however you like, here on YouTube or through our email or whatever you like. We're always happy to help. So our next talk will be on the 27th, and we'll explore a little bit on why perhaps you or others, right, are feeling empty inside, right? We're surrounded by a lot of things, right? A lot of things going on. So why do people feel empty? Right. So we will be exploring that on the 27th at 6 p.m. Central Time. And so we look forward to seeing you then and there. And so thank you for coming. And we wish you all many blessings.